I'd like to welcome you this evening to the Royal Society of Biology's Northern Region talk. We try and keep in touch with each other and have the opportunity for discussions probably once a month, usually on a Thursday evening. We've been delighted that we've been able to keep going doing this via Zoom, and it's a means for us to all keep up to date and keep in contact with each other as well. This evening, I'm absolutely delighted that we've got a talk from Pen-Yuan Hsing, who was a Durham student, a PhD student in until recently. He's actually going to be talking to us today or this evening from Bath, those sunny southern climes. He still has lots of contacts and with the North region, and he's going to be talking about work that he was doing while he was up here doing the wildlife monitoring. So he received his PhD from Durham University, and he's the co-founder of MammalWeb, which is what he's going to be talking to us about, this citizen science project. He's a trained ecologist and has experience of fieldwork on 4 different continents, all of which are obviously a bit closed down at the moment. He's interested in how science can be part of civic participation, and we'll be hearing more about that. He's also been involved in science outreach for more than 15 years and is a strong advocate for open science. So he's interested in lots of new projects and ideas, and if anyone's got anything interesting that they'd like to talk to him about, I'm sure he'll either take questions at the end or his contact details are available for potential collaborations in ecology or conservation or citizen science if ideas spring to mind as a result of the talk. So I'm going to ask Pen to unmute himself and he'll share his screen. We will, if you want to interject at any point, can you do it via the chat, and I'll keep monitoring that. And we'll then open up for questions and discussions both with Pen and amongst ourselves after Pen's finished his presentation. So thank you, Pen.
Thank you, Ros. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I see a couple of familiar names in the participants list. Long time no see, and thank you very much for coming. I'm really glad all of you are here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you just a little bit about the work that I've been doing with the MammalWeb project since 2014. The MammalWeb project is something we started, way back then to deal with the issues in biodiversity monitoring that the UK is facing right now. And over the next hour or so, I'd like to give you a fairly high-level overview of the work we're doing and what I think the really important aspects of it are. So one of our very original motivations is that there are a lot of gaps in global biodiversity monitoring in terms of the data that we can collect. And there was this very prominent paper by Magnus from 2016 that talks about how citizen science can play a big role in filling a lot of these data gaps, right? So citizen science is something that has been happening actually for a very long time. And very broadly speaking, it's about people who are not professional scientists who participate in the scientific process. And a huge part of that traditionally has actually been in astronomy, where a lot of amateur astronomers have contributed to making a lot of really important astronomical observations. And in more recent years, with all the digital technologies that we have, a very famous citizen science project that became prominent about a decade ago was called Galaxy Zoo, where astronomers put up these pictures of galaxies that they get from their telescopes, right? And they put it online, and anyone can go to the Galaxy Zoo website and help them tag these photos with the shape and the characteristics of of these galaxies. So it's kind of like a crowdsourcing process. And this is kind of like how a lot of citizen science got started. But in biology and ecology, this has become really popular too. There's the Earthworm Watch project that was really fun, where you go into your gardens, you dig up your earthworms and report on your observations back to this big database, right? There's the big butterfly count. I really like Bee Watch. You should check out that website. It's really fun. And there's, of course, the big garden bird watch that happens across the UK. Now, as this continued, one project that really inspired me was called Snapshot Serengeti. So this is started by someone I knew called Ali Swanson, and she went to the Serengeti in Southern Africa, and she set up, she collected a lot of pictures of wildlife, and she doesn't have the ability and time to sort through the millions of images that she got to tag the animals in them. So she worked with the Galaxy Zoo people, put these pictures online, and since people were really interested in looking at pictures of these animals, they helped her classify all of these images, in the span of a couple of weeks, when it would have taken her a couple months to do it on her own. So that's really cool. Now, in the UK, there was another paper from a few years ago that talks about how there are a lot of these data deserts where we don't know very much about even just the basics of the diversity and distribution of wild mammals in this country. So, we were thinking about how to address this problem, and we thought, okay, we know that there are a lot of issues facing these animals, right? So one is that even common species are important. They're actually very fundamental to the underlying structure of a lot of ecosystems. And another interesting thing is that common species are actually not that common in itself, in that there's so many species of animals on this planet, but not very many of them are extremely common, if that makes sense, right? So this is interesting, and this is important because in the UK, sometimes, we talk to people and they're like, well, we don't have a lot of super endangered species, we're not like a tropical rainforest or something. So why is mammal monitoring the UK so important? But even common animals are important ecologically. And of course, there are species that are of management concern. There's the issues of red squirrels declining because of the invasive gray squirrels, right? They're expanding in this country. Of course, there's the issue of disease, such as myxomatosis for rabbits. And of course, there's the controversy around, TB and badgers. Now, one form of animal monitoring that's worked really well are the breeding bird surveys that happen every year, right? I'm sure a lot of you have even participated in the breeding bird surveys. But when it comes to these surveys, it's that they happen during the day and during the breeding season. So when you do this, you don't really see a lot of mammals that you could record because mammals are often elusive and a lot of them are nocturnal. So it's with all of this in mind that we started the MammalWeb project, which you can visit on MammalWeb.org. We started it as a collaboration between us at Durham University and the people at the Durham Wildlife Trust. So it started in Durham, and since it began in 2015, when we first started recruiting citizen scientists, we have now more than 200 people across the region and actually across this country now who are deploying motion sensing camera traps in their back gardens, in forests, and other places, right? So what we did was that we held a lot of these workshops where we train people on how to deploy and set up these camera traps. And the way they work is that, let's say you tie it up against the trunk of a tree and you leave it. And then, in the middle of the night, an animal walks in front of it. It would trigger the motion sensor on the camera, and it would take a picture of the animal. We trained the citizen scientists in a very rigorous protocol where they have to collect all of the metadata that goes with these camera trap pictures, right? Such as the place, the coordinates where you set up the camera, when you put it up and when you took it down, and things like that. So it started kind of in the Durham area, but now more than 900 different sites across the country are represented in MammalWeb from where people have set up these camera traps. And collectively, that's accumulated more than 65,000 camera trap days worth of observations. That's more than 180 years worth of observation time in this country, which I think is pretty amazing. And this really is a very different form of doing ecological field research compared to traditional ways where me, as one ecologist, I have to go out and set up all of these camera traps on my own. People really like seeing the pictures that they get, such as this or this one that I really like. And this was one of the first pictures that I got as a MammalWeb citizen scientist way back in 2015. And as you can see, there's a roe deer in it. And if you look closely, it's got a little bit of a big belly, right? And what's cool about camera traps is that you can set it up, put them out in the wild. And with the batteries that you're on, they can be out there for a couple months at a time, sometimes even longer. So this is one picture from the camera trap, but it kept taking pictures, right? So a couple weeks later, the same camera trap got a picture of the same deer, but with a little baby deer walking behind it. And I just thought, this is such a cool thing for people to see, especially when they take ownership of setting up these cameras and discovering the wildlife that live in their neighborhoods. So what everyone can do, as long as they have an internet connection, is to visit MammalWeb.org and sign up to be a spotter, where you can use an interface like this on your mobile device, your computers, and help classify the animals that show up on MammalWeb. It's a really fun process, and according to some people, it can be pretty addictive too. MammalWeb citizen scientists have uploaded almost 1.5 million camera trap images to the website, which I think is a pretty stunning number for a project that started pretty small, actually, like MammalWeb. So we hope that this project will help us start to feel and in a way, cultivate almost some of these wild mammal data deserts in this country so that we can have a better understanding of the diversity and distribution of mammals. And in addition to spatial information, we can also look at temporal information, right? Because such as diurnal observations of that fox, because the camera traps, they tell you the timestamp of when each picture was taken. So you can look at how things change over time, which is really important. And what I'm showing you now are diurnal observations of what happens over the span of a day. But now that MammalWeb has been running for several years, you can start to see seasonal data, right? And this is really important, especially if you can do a long term to look at effects from climate change, for instance. And if you go to MammalWeb, we now have interactive visualizations where you can explore the data that's coming out of the project on a global scale, or you can choose a species and look at the statistics for that species across space and time, which I think is pretty cool. Now, one really important thing is that sometimes you get pictures like this, right? You only see part of the animal. So one really important thing is that the camera traps are set to take pictures in burst mode, which means that they take multiple pictures at a time really quickly, so that at least a couple of them might get a picture of the whole animal, so that in this case, you can see that it's probably a red fox. But sometimes you also get pictures that are just like this, and it's really hard to tell what species is depicted in this photo. So one thing we worked on for a couple of years, and we are still working on now, is that on MammalWeb, we actually show the same sequence of photos to multiple people. And in a way, this is almost like a voting system where people are voting on what they think is in the picture, right? And we call this, the process of deriving consensus classifications of camera trap images. And we have a logistic regression model that's calibrated with a subset of expert classifications that we did on our own. There was a paper we published about this, and I can talk about this more. But basically, what happens is that, let's say everyone agrees that, let's say red fox, for instance, in a camera trap picture, then we have a really high probability represented by this, yellow line that it really is a red fox in the picture. But if there are votes that disagree with the consensus, then it really brings down that confidence, and you need a lot more votes suggesting that the species is present to increase the probability that it's really there. So for red fox, the model looks like this. And you can see that if everyone agrees, then it's almost certainly a red fox. But since red fox is pretty distinctive, as soon as someone says, "Hey, actually, I don't think that's a red fox," then the confidence comes down a lot. Right? Now, a really interesting thing is that you can also vote for nothing, because sometimes camera traps are triggered by like a leaf falling down and there really isn't an animal. And if everyone agrees that there's nothing in a photo, then yeah, we can be pretty certain there's nothing there. But as soon as someone says that there is something in a picture, then you can see that the confidence we can have in that there's nothing really comes down a lot. And this kind of makes sense too, if you think about it. So there are some interesting species-specific patterns that we can see here. But regardless, we think this approach to doing consensus classifications is important to the crowdsourcing process because we can attach a level of uncertainty to the classifications that people are providing. And we have submitted some pictures that we're really confident in as a data set to the Environmental Records Information Center, ERIC for short, and we're working with the National Biodiversity Network, which is pretty big, to upload all of the MammalWeb data set. My personal ambition is that one day MammalWeb data can be integrated into the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which has global coverage of wildlife observations across the world. So that's a lot of the work that we've done during the first few years, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the citizen scientists that participate in MammalWeb, right? So with regards to citizen scientists, it's really important, I think, to talk about the students from schools that were involved in this project. And we got a lot of help from the British Ecological Society in this. And I was really privileged to take MammalWeb into schools, the first of which is Belmont Community School in Durham. And for me, I've seen so many camera trap pictures. When I see a picture of a squirrel like this, I don't really feel that excited anymore. But for a student in a school who set up their own camera traps, they get so excited to see this picture that they got, that they set up near their schools, right? And I worked with these students, not just working with them where they're the citizen scientists, but we also worked with them where they designed science outreach activities around MammalWeb to communicate the project to a wide audience. And it's amazing how well they work together. So these students, they designed activities, and one of the first large events that these students went to is the Celebrate Science Festival, organized by Durham University in 2017. This is an annual event. Some of you have probably visited it. And during that event, it wasn't me. I took the pictures, but it was the students from Belmont School who set up their own stall. And it's the only stall run by local school students at Celebrate Science, where they explained MammalWeb and the importance of ecological monitoring to the visitors to this event, right? And it was really well received. And this is a really fun game that these students use to get people interested. So if you look closely on this table, there are these petri dishes of different kinds of poo from different animal species. And the game is for you to match the pictures of animals with the poo that they produce, which was really popular with the 2,000 people that visited Celebrate Science. And I certainly thought it was a great success, but don't take it from me, right? If you ask the people who went to Celebrate Science, they said that it's great to see young people who are so knowledgeable and enthusiastic about science. And the organizers said that people often refer to MammalWeb as their favorite activity at Celebrate Science. And I'm just amazed that school students can do such a great job at doing outreach for ecology. And on top of all of this, we were able to get support to produce a professionally made short 10-minute documentary where these students from Belmont School actually explained how to set up a camera trap and get images of local wildlife. They explained how everything worked and what the MammalWeb project meant for them, which I think is really inspiring. Now, since it was such a large success, MammalWeb is now in 42 different schools across the Northeast. Sammy Mason is our main schools person now. She worked with the network of schools that's organized by the Great North Museum in Hancock in Newcastle. And she took MammalWeb to these 42 schools. And that reached 2,800 primary school students in the region. And they were also excited about discovering the wildlife near their schools and near their communities. And Sammy has just done an amazing job with this. And she's doing this as part of her PhD research. And I'm sure there's a lot you can ask her, but just some quick results. The schools loved it. They think this really started a new tradition, with engaging with the outdoors that they didn't have before. Through a survey that Sammy designed, these students have showed an increase in a quantified measure of how connected they are with nature, which I think is really important, especially in the times we live in. So I think that's pretty cool. And I also mentioned that it was with the Great North Museum Hancock, which was a partnership that we started in 2019. And another really cool activity that came out of it is that in the museum, there is a MammalWeb exhibit. And it's a touchscreen interactive activity that was set up by Sean, who is another person in MammalWeb who's doing her PhD on this. And it's got a touch screen that looks like this, and you can just flip through the pictures and tap on the animals that you think, is in the picture, kind of like what you see on the MammalWeb website. So this is also pretty cool. And I like this museum a lot when I last visited there. It's got a cool natural history exhibit. And during the time when Sean was running her study, more than 300,000 visitors visited the museum over there in Newcastle. And they contributed 50,000 classifications for MammalWeb camera trap images. And it was interesting because, first of all, it turns out that the classifications provided through the interactive exhibit, they were, a lot less accurate than the ones provided on the MammalWeb website. Now, Sean probably knows more about this, but I suspect, it could be, for instance, a young child, right, who's just, banging on the touch screen and, pressing on everything they can. So maybe that affects the accuracy a little bit of the classifications. However, what was really interesting is that Sean did a survey on the visitors to the museum. And more than half of them were motivated by their experience to move on to sign up to MammalWeb and classify images on the website, and possibly even set up camera traps of their own. And on that note, I'll quickly say that MammalWeb also has a loan scheme. So if you don't have a camera trap, you can borrow one from MammalWeb, and you can set up that camera trap in your garden, for instance. So that was pretty fun. And all of these are still ongoing. I also like to talk to you about some of the things we're doing now. So obviously work is still going on regarding these consensus classifications. Just yesterday, I literally just emailed a new draft of a paper that we're working on with my PhD supervisor, Phil Stevens. And so this is still happening. One challenge is that there's still a lot of subtle ambiguities when it comes to animal classification, such as dealing with issues where people are asking, is this a rabbit? Is this a hare? Or I think I see a little rodent in that corner, but what kind of rodent? I'm not really sure. Like a lot of edge cases like this. So how do you deal with that, right? And when it comes to identification, a big deal these days is automated image recognition through deep learning and artificial intelligence, right? Now, personally, I think there's a lot of really creepy stuff happening with image recognition, but when it comes to camera trap pictures, there is a lot of really interesting work going on, where a computer can actually recognize different species of animals in a camera trap image. This work is just starting to take off. And MammalWeb is part of that effort. And one of our PhD students, Jonathan Rees, is the main person behind this computer vision artificial intelligence work. We have some ideas for where we want to take the interactive data visualizations to give you more information, but also as a way for citizen scientists to take ownership of the scientific process where they can ask questions of the data on their own, right? So it's not just us professional scientists doing it. So I think that's pretty cool. There's now the ability to upload videos. I really like this video that I got of a feeding event that was going on from both carnivores and herbivores. And you can also see, groups of animals moving together. You can look at animal behavior, interactions between these animals. And, it's just such a treat to see these things happening, on video. Another really cool thing is that MammalWeb now has the ability to host projects. So what this means is that other conservation organizations who use camera traps, they are hosting their projects on MammalWeb. And a really good example is Scottish Wildcat Action, based in Scotland. They have camera traps of lots of wildcat pictures. And they have a project on MammalWeb. And what happens is that, they upload their camera trap pictures to their project on MammalWeb. And anyone who goes on MammalWeb, they can choose whether to contribute classifications to a particular project. And this turns out to be a really, a mutually beneficial arrangement. Because for these projects, they normally don't have the resources to classify so many camera trap images, but once they upload it to MammalWeb, then there's a whole group of people who are helping them do the classifications, right? And it's great for MammalWeb because these organizations from across the country, they are expanding the spatial and temporal coverage of mammal monitoring across, across the UK. So that's really cool. And if you go to the MammalWeb website right now, you can see that we now have more than 20 partner projects set up on MammalWeb. You can see that one of them is called MammalNet. And I want to bring that up because MammalWeb is no longer just limited to the UK. The UK is no longer the only European country that's represented because MammalNet has brought us international partners from Germany, Spain, Poland, and Croatia. And citizen scientists in those countries are also uploading camera trap pictures to MammalWeb. And I think that's really gratifying. And another interesting thing to look at going forward for this collaboration is that in my experience, I found that there is a more of a tradition of natural history and wildlife monitoring in the UK. but possibly less so in some of these other countries. So it's interesting to see and examine how the level of engagement might vary across different cultures and backgrounds. So those are some examples of what we're doing right now. And I also want to mention citizen-initiated science. So MammalWeb citizen scientists have come up with some of their own ideas for what they want to do. And one of which is that they've taken upon themselves to track down invasive non-native species in this country, such as this raccoon that was pictured in Sunderland a while back, right? And I really like to talk about this example, because MammalWeb citizen scientists, they're like, wow, there's a raccoon roaming around in my neighborhood. And they actually worked with, they got in touch with DEFRA, who helped track down this raccoon and apprehend it. And now it's undergoing rehab in a zoo somewhere. So I think that's a really cool example of dealing with non-native species. This one is also really interesting, also from a few years ago. These pictures are kind of blurry. This one is a little less blurry. And it's not a raccoon. It's actually a coati, which is definitely not from this country. It's not even from this continent. So it's probably some exotic pet that some irresponsible owner has released into the wild. And MammalWeb citizen scientists were also instrumental in tracking down this individual. A MammalWeb citizen scientist, Ann Kelly, she started her own otter monitoring project, and she set up her own camera trapping surveys, and actually runs her own camera trapping trainings to other conservation organizations. And she developed all of this independently from MammalWeb. Another guy I really like to talk about all the time is Roland Ashcroft. So Roland, he was like, MammalWeb sounds interesting, so I'll borrow a camera trap and see what animals I can get, right? And later he got so into this that he wrote his own computer program to analyze all of the data that he got from his camera traps, and using all of the data that he got, he actually wrote up reports about his observations and discoveries. And one of his major projects that he set up with his friends is in Galloway, Scotland, where he set up an array of camera traps spread across a whole region to track the changes in distribution of red squirrels, because as I understand it, it's kind of like the front line of the gray squirrel invasion that's kind of pushing back the population of red squirrels over there. And Roland actually wrote up a whole report on his discoveries. And if I remember correctly from my PhD supervisor, Phil, is that, Phil looked at Roland's report and he thought, wow, if Roland actually signed up to do a master's degree at Durham, he would have gotten a degree out of the report that he wrote. And I think this is an amazing example of how far citizen scientists can take this research. And I am pleased to report that Roland's work was actually featured in the Observer a couple of years ago that you can read about. If you're interested, I can send you a link to that news report. So red squirrels are a big deal for Roland, but closer to home, he set up camera traps near his village, and he got pictures of a local population of roe deer that people didn't know about before. And this is particularly noteworthy because he got in touch with the government, who was planning a local nature reserve in that area, and they didn't know about this population of roe deer. So Roland's data actually fed into the planning of that reserve and informed that planning and shaped it in a way that wouldn't have been possible without the civic engagement that Roland does, and he still does till today. And I think that has been really inspiring for me as well. And these are just a few examples of the ecological studies that MammalWeb citizen scientists have started. And I think this is really noteworthy because it's not just me as a professional scientist doing my research, but it's actually expanding far beyond that. So when it comes to MammalWeb, it's not alone. There are other ecological wildlife monitoring projects similar to MammalWeb across the world now. If you're really interested in this, there's another really big one called eMammal, which is based in the US. They started in North Carolina, and they're also really successful. They just had a paper out like literally a couple of days ago. That's where I want to note this because I think they were able to organize like 400 citizen scientists across the state of North Carolina. And over several years, they were able to quintuple the number of wildlife records for the entire state. And it was done in a way that they were actually able to derive real, actionable wildlife monitoring insight from the citizen science collected data. So MammalWeb is definitely part of a much more global movement right now. And it's not just for ecology. It's also part of a wider DIY biology movement, do-it-yourself biology, where a lot of citizen scientists have taken upon themselves to not just learn about biology, but participate in the research itself in ways that they are able to. For instance, this is a project that I really like where it's a bunch of enthusiasts, right? They're really interested in molecular biology, and they developed the OpenPCR project. It's a PCR thermocycler, which I suspect a lot of you are familiar with. That's completely open source, it's low cost. It's developed by people who are just really interested in biology, but what's particularly amazing is that the performance of this PCR thermocycler is comparable to a lot of, quote unquote, professional PCR machines that biologists used in a university lab, for instance. Now, again, it's not just molecular biology, though. I want to quickly bring up this example, which was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico just over a decade ago. I still remember it was this oil spill happened because this oil rig explosion, right? And it happened on Earth Day in 2010, ironically. And I want to bring this up because I was actually part of this in a way. So back in the day, in my past life as a marine biologist, I was part of a group of scientists who were investigating the impact of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill on marine biology. But what I didn't know at the time was that because this oil spill has really affected the livelihoods of a lot of people who live along the Gulf Coast in the United States, that concerned citizens actually got together and formed an organization called the Public Lab. And what the citizen scientists did at the time was that, they were like, okay, we're really affected by this oil spill, right? Because our tourism industry is affected, our fishing industry is affected, and all of that stuff. And we just see dead animals and oil washing up on our beach. But it's really hard for us to understand what's going on. The data is not accessible. Scientists writing jargon that we don't understand, and the government isn't being transparent. So they took it into their own hands and they developed their own scientific instrumentation that they put into a balloon mapping kit that they designed, which you can still get today from Public Lab. And they also have all of the schematics and design files. So you can actually build this mapping kit yourself, by the way. But anyway, they designed all of this, they built it, and they sent up these balloon mapping kits where they took these down-looking images during the oil spill that got almost real-time data that tracks how the oil spill was spreading in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's not just getting pictures. They were this became a huge project in the U.S. and it's a global project now where they're able to use these citizen-collected imagery not just for scientific purposes, but also in cases of environmental disaster, use them as evidence in legal proceedings to get the reparations that they were seeking, which I think is extremely noteworthy. I actually met one of the founders of Public Lab a couple of years ago, and she was telling me about all of the work that they're doing, and it just blows me away. They also are interested in other forms of science. They have a really cool community microscope kit that you can also build yourself. It's also part of a wider open science hardware movement. And these really low cost and open source scientific hardware have actually been used in real public health applications. For instance, one of the colleagues that I'm working right now, they developed a microscope kit that looks just a little bit more advanced than the one you're seeing on the screen right now. And you can 3D print the parts. And you can use that microscope, for instance, to look at malaria and study malaria and all that stuff. Lots of real biological applications. So these are just a few more examples of what citizen science can do. And the last example I want to talk about is one that started from this. So this is a picture of what happened after the tsunami, earthquake, and nuclear disaster at Fukushima in Japan from 2013, right? So you might all remember this disaster, but what's a little less well known is that soon afterwards, again, it was concerned citizen scientists who got together and they started a project called Safecast. And what they did was that they also designed and built their own radiation sensors, where they took out and mapped where all of the highest levels of harmful radiation were around the disaster site at the time. So they built all of these maps on their own. And if you go to their website now, you can actually zoom out from what you see on the screen right now. And they actually have coverage in a lot of places across the world. And now, not just for radiation sensors, but also for environmental monitoring of other parameters like air pollution and other forms of data. It's really becoming a global movement now. So I talk about all of this because I want to end by talking about something that I feel really strongly about, which is that for a long time, science has really been a kind of like a ivory tower kind of enterprise, right? Where professional scientists kind of are holed up in their labs doing all of that work, and it's inscrutable to a lot of people. And even when it comes to citizen science, it has traditionally been a really centralized process where a professional scientist will be like, okay, I am doing this research project and I need help collecting data, or I need help classifying data or processing data. So I'm going to ask a lot of volunteers for help, such as, those astronomy examples that I talked about at the very beginning, right? And that's great. It's a cool form of engagement and increases scientific literacy, all that stuff. It's really great. So, and it's becoming really popular these days. But I think through some of the examples that I've talked about today, whether that's MammalWeb or the other citizen science projects, citizen science is actually also becoming more decentralized, or even developing a distributed or peer-to-peer topology where citizens are able to take advantage of the digital tools that we have today to really start to engage in more of the scientific process, in addition to processing data, right? And I think that's a really profound phenomenon that's worth thinking about today. Now, there's this really cool book that part of it talked about how citizen science really isn't just about citizens collecting data for scientists. It's also about how science can help with civic engagement, right? Because whether it's MammalWeb citizen scientists collecting camera trap pictures to inform the design of a local nature reserve, or concerned citizens collecting data to track the spread of an oil spill, or citizens collecting data on harmful radiation. I think they all represent a way where, if we start to develop, more broadly, this kind of scientific literacy, where it's not just about having scientific knowledge, but having scientific skills and critical thinking, then we can really apply that to the civic engagement that we do in the democratic process. And I think that kind of ability is so important, especially now. So this relationship between science and citizenship, I think, is one of the most important messages and lessons that I've learned from having the privilege of working with MammalWeb for the past 6 or 7 years. So that's what I have for you today for my presentation. And I just like to thank all of the people that I have been so lucky to work with over the years, whether it's my supervisors for my PhD, such as Phil Stevens, Lorraine Kokil from the Durham University Outreach people, Sammy and Sean, the other PhD students, and Roland and the other citizen scientists. I'm really grateful for what they've taught me so much over the years. And of course, I'm really grateful for all of you coming to the event today. I hope I haven't put all of you to sleep. If not, and if you're actually interested in learning more, here's more information about MammalWeb. You can participate in any way you like, help classify pictures. You can borrow a camera trap from MammalWeb, or you can get your own if you want. Set up a camera trap to get wildlife pictures and upload them to MammalWeb. So yeah, that's what I've got for you today, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much, Pen. That's really great. Can you remove your share screen, and then I think it's a bit easier for people to see everybody else on gallery view.
Yes, let me,
thank you.
One moment.
So,
right.
Thank you very much. So there's the opportunity now for us to ask Pen any questions we've got about the presentation or about any of the ideas that he was talking about there. And you can either do that by popping information on the chat, or if you put your hand up on the reactions on the Zoom, hopefully I'll be able to call on you to unmute and see where we go. I think I'll just start one, if you don't mind, Pen.
Okay.
Because one of the things I'm involved in biology education and teacher training, and one of the things that really concerns me is that a lot of the science that we teach in school doesn't really represent doing science. And I love the way in which this engagement, particularly when it's more than just being a lab assistant to somebody and counting something, actually allows other people to engage with the data, ask their own questions, and set up their own communities as well. I was wondering whether you obviously did some work with Belmont Secondary School. I was wondering whether there were other secondary schools that you might have used, and how you get on with that and how you got them engaged.
Okay. I have to say that my primary work was with Belmont School. So I didn't work directly with other secondary schools. However, I will briefly note that because of the work with Belmont School, one of the teachers there, Julie Ryder, a few years ago when I was there, she actually set up this networking meeting where we kind of informally call it like a speed dating event, where it was hosted at Belmont School. And then Julie, the teacher, Ms. Ryder, she helped connect with other primary and secondary schools in the region where all of those teachers from the other schools, they came for this event, where the teachers came, and then I got in touch with the other science-related departments in Durham, and researchers from Durham, including postgraduate students, came to the speed dating event, right? And then we had kind of like a musical chairs and musical chairs thing where every 20 minutes you swap pairings with a different teacher and postgraduate student, and then they talk about potential ways of bringing their research into schools. And we made a lot of connections that way. And also, as I mentioned, Sammy is working with a lot of schools now. So with regards to specific schools, I might have to refer you to Sammy instead, but I'm sure she can answer more on that front.
Caroline, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was just going to ask actually, so Magnus, who's on the call, had done some work experience with MammalWeb. I just wondered whether he wanted to unmute and tell us what he'd done with MammalWeb. Magnus, are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Well, I didn't actually meet Pen. I think you're out of town or something. But what was I doing? Oh yeah, so for the international one, when they were building it up, they needed pictures. So I was just finding pictures for that. And then I was also checking as part of the expert thing for the museum. And someone had indeed just gone through and just pressed send. There's nothing in any of them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And would you recommend other students do that, Magnus?
Yes, absolutely. It was really fun.
And could I ask Miss Murphy a question? Is it something you think your school might want to have sort of involvement with, or?
Yes, absolutely. I must admit, I'd not heard of MammalWeb before the talk was advertised this evening, but I'm fairly certain, without doubt, that there would be lots of students in our school willing to take part in this. And also,
excellent.
how would they go about, like Magnus, getting some work experience, or just to get involved in it, like Magnus did? Is there a set procedure that you have in place?
So was that for Magnus or was it for me?
Either.
Okay. Yeah. So there isn't a very formal process. It's actually more of just a matter of getting in touch with us through our email, which I just posted the link to, but I can post it again. Let's see. Right, so I just put it in the chat, info@mammalweb.org, and if you get in touch with us that way, just tell us, hey, we're from this school, and our students would be excited about working with you. Then we'll respond, and we can set things up that way. It's not a very complicated process. I remember when I did it, I literally just put the camera trapping equipment into a bag, brought it to the school, or I would put it into a box and put it through the post office, and we can just get started that way. Mm-hmm.
So schools so schools can borrow the cameras and things from MammalWeb, and then like they just set it up somewhere. And is it technically challenging to do that, or is it fairly straightforward?
It's fairly straightforward. So for those of you who are interested, I'll spend a couple minutes going over the process. The camera trap, you saw a picture of it. It's basically just a digital camera, but it's in like a really rugged housing, right? So it can stay outside. And then, so you put the batteries in, just normal AA batteries. One really important thing is that there's a clock in the camera trap. So you have to set the correct time on it. And obviously that's super important data because you want, the timestamp for the pictures to be the correct times. But once you set it up, you close it up, you tie it to a tree or a pole, right? Leave it, come back in a month, take it down, connect it to your computer, download the pictures, and see what you get.
So there's no cost to the school, it's a loan basically of the equipment.
Yeah, so MammalWeb has a lot of camera traps. Now, as I understand it, some schools do get their own camera traps if they have, the ability and interest. That's great. But MammalWeb has a lot of camera traps too. Now, I don't have the numbers on exactly, how many are available today. Yeah. Sammy probably has that number, but but it is something that that we do.
Okay. But cost wouldn't be something that would prevent a school from getting involved,
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pen, there's a question on the chat from
yes.
Sarah about whether the precise locations of the camera traps are publicized on MammalWeb, or whether they're actually more generalized just to sort of protect people's privacy and protect presumably the animals.
Right. That's a great question. Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate you asking that. So two things. Number one, in the MammalWeb database, there are fairly precise coordinates of where the camera trap was set up. That is true. We do have that information because of this very important ecological data. However, to address your question, my second point is that, let's say you go to MammalWeb right now, right? And if you recall, I showed you a brief look at the interactive data visualizations that we have. And the geographical resolution is very coarse. So if I remember correctly, it doesn't become any more accurate than, I forgot what it is today, but it's definitely not more precise than 1 grid square in terms of the UK awareness grid survey, but I think the resolution might even be lower than that. Actually, I need to double check, but yeah, but that is with consideration to the animals and the very occasional human that might pop up in the pictures, which is another interesting topic.
I was wondering what happened to coding. If you actually you obviously had some pictures where there was 2 individuals of the same species, but whether your coding took account of the fact that you might have 2 different species within the same photo, and whether you were able to code for that.
Okay. So multiple species in a photo, right? So yeah, so on MammalWeb, you see all of those buttons on the side representing a different species. So you can just click on multiple species depending on how many of them you see in the picture. I will also note that in addition to designating the species, you can also specify how many of them you see in the pictures. Now, for MammalWeb, that's fairly easy. It's very rare for you to see more than 3 or 4 animals in a picture at a time. It actually becomes kind of a problem in the Snapshot Serengeti project I told you about, which was done in Tanzania. And in that case, they might have like hundreds, if not thousands of animals as part of like a migration or something moving in front of the camera, and it's just not possible for someone to count it. It is a challenge, but not one that MammalWeb has to immediately face right now. And just really quickly with regard to humans, they very occasionally pop up. Most of the time it's just like someone's feet or something. However, if you go to MammalWeb, you will see a human button. And what happens is that as soon as someone clicks the human button, that picture will not be shown to anyone else again, just to reduce the exposure a little bit. And since computers are so amazing at recognizing humans in pictures these days, I know some other projects where they built that into the system. So the computer will do a first pass through all of the pictures first, right? And then the computer will read out all of the human pictures so that visitors to the website will never see those humans to begin with. So that's something some people are working on too. I hope that answers the question.
Keith, do you want to unmute and talk to Pen?
Yeah,
Hey, Keith, long time no see.
it was a really nice talk. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I was just wondering how you organized this sort of spread of MammalWeb through Europe.
Ah, okay.
You got these interactions with other countries. How did you organize that? And is that a sort of an active link now, or are they doing their own thing? I was just interested in how that's working.
Yeah, thank you. So it's becoming more active. For most of the past couple of years, it has mostly been a relatively simple process where on MammalWeb we have these different projects, right? And these international projects, they will have their own project on MammalWeb. They upload their camera trap pictures to it, and then people help classify it. And it's a simple process like that. However, we are becoming more integrated now through the MammalNet organization, which sounds very similar to MammalWeb, but it's called MammalNet, and it's through someone we know at Alpha, the Animal Plant Health Agency, which is part of DEFRA, and he has a lot of experience working with MammalNet, and we're in the process of integrating MammalWeb with the mobile apps that they have for animal classifications, and we're working together on integrating the database components and all that stuff. So I have to say it's just in the process of getting started. So I think there's still a lot to be learned. Yeah, that's where we are right now.
Okay, great. Great project.
There's another question, Pen, from Andrea. Andrea, do you want to unmute and ask your question direct to Pen?
Okay, sure. So yeah, my question was if the data generated by your project is also integrated in other global citizen science initiatives, such as iNaturalist or the GBIF platform.
GBIF, right? The Global Biodiversity Information Facility. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of both of those projects that you raised, actually. I've been on iNaturalist myself. It's really fun. For those of you who haven't been on iNaturalist, I highly recommend it. It's cool. So yeah, that's a great question. In terms of integrating data, it has been really challenging. So it's surprisingly challenging, actually, since there's so much biodiversity data that's coming out, and it's hard to integrate. I think a big part of that is in terms of the metadata standards. Sometimes it's trivial but really annoying things where people use different date formats, and it's hard to integrate that. They might have a string of numbers for the dates, and you have no idea what date it actually is, because it's ambiguous, right? Stuff like that. Or sometimes it's on a higher level, such as the collection methodology for the data. So you have a lot of camera trap pictures, but it's not clear, the methodology that was used to produce that data. Is it from a systematic grid survey, or was it ad hoc, and was it collected by citizen scientists, that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, we've only been able to submit data to ERIC Northeast, and we are close to integrating with the National Biodiversity Network, but not on a global level like GBIF yet. However, what's cool is that GBIF is developing a camera trap data standard that they've actually already published on their website. And I hope that process will start the integration that you're talking about.
Thank you.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's the same problem people have when they're trying to merge any data set. And yet here we are looking at merging of data sets produced by amateur people who are contributing, and yet the same questions are being asked about the integrity of the data, about the reliability of the data, all these issues to do with coding. I loved seeing those coding graphs to see how much confidence you had in the identification. What happens when there isn't an agreement?
Right. So what we try to do when there is an agreement is that, okay, so first of all, we might set like a threshold, like, okay, if 5 people or 10 people, if they looked at the image and they all disagree, or they don't agree enough to generate high confidence, then right now, all we can do is that we identify those images and we have to classify them ourselves. It's actually as simple as that. However, even then, it drastically reduces the number of manual classifications that any individual scientist has to do. And surprisingly enough, if you put enough eyes on a picture, the accuracy of their classifications can be surprisingly high for wild animals, and also for those astronomy pictures that I talked about before. I mean, at least I was personally very surprised by that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering whether we have a lot of professional biologists on the call here. I'm wondering whether there's people actually beginning to think about whether they could make any parts of their research supported by citizen science or anything like that. Caroline's got a hand up.
I think you might have to unmute.
Unmute, Caroline, please.
Yeah, it was a clap, really, because I'm really impressed. It's incredible what you can do with these things, and to sort of be able to basically spread it around and get the data, but also get so many people involved. It's really, really powerful, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity with there's an increased awareness of epidemiology and infection and biology over the last year amongst the general public as to whether there's actually something that could be tapped into there as well. But I'm not super familiar with them, but I know that there are successful citizen science projects related to epidemiology. But also not just for humans, actually. There are ones that track disease in animals and plants too. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, Paul. Paul, can you unmute yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Just thank you for the talk. I enjoyed it enormously. It's a long time since I did that sort of work. Longworth traps, I remember. Which is a very long time ago, and Trap Happy Voles then became more of a botanist. The Lichen Society had lots of parallels to this, and the workshop on Wednesday morning, which is once a fortnight now, has got up to sort of 29 people, and there's another one on a Tuesday that's come through Zoom. But the Lichen Society is largely amateur, and always has been. And I've been on both sides of that, I suppose. And of course, the vast majority of the records are amateur ones, collected actually by a lichenologist in Newcastle, mapping. So it has lots of parallels, I think, with that data. But of course, the danger is we're mapping lichenologists rather than lichens, which is always a difficulty. Wasn't it when the Biological Records Centre started, they found that the common frog was an entirely urban species. No frogs in the countryside at all. They all lived in towns because they were mapping frog spotters.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in the countryside ever commented on. Nobody recorded a frog in the countryside because they didn't think it was anything unusual.
Yeah.
But in towns, people did.
Yes, that's a great point. And this is actually something that people talk about in citizen science a lot, because you record something when you find it noteworthy, when it's remarkable, right? And sometimes you might not notice something that's right in front of you because it didn't surprise you, for instance, and you might not end up recording or reporting that. So in the academic field studying citizen science, this is something that that people are looking into. Absolutely, that's a great point.
Caroline Champion,
Thank
would you like to unmute yourself?
Good evening. Thank you very much for the chat. I have a bit of experience with iNaturalist, but I didn't know about your program before. What I am interested in is I like the fact that you're able to loan out cameras to schools, but do you have recommendations if the schools wanted to purchase their own? And I know that your map showed a lot of European countries that were involved, but I'm based in Northern Ireland at the moment. And
Okay.
I didn't see any of the schools there, and we're still classed as part of the UK. So
yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. I think it would be absolutely wonderful if there can be representation from Northern Ireland on MammalWeb. I think it is something that I would personally love to have. And yeah, so borrowing camera traps is definitely possible. I think you also asked about purchasing camera traps and recommendations. So if you search for camera traps, you can see that the price range is very wide. You can buy one for 50, 60 pounds. And they go up to, costing 10 times as much for a camera. And I can tell you from my personal experiences that this really is something where you get what you pay for. In my experience, you probably want to buy something that's at least 100 pounds or more for one camera. It's a little bit expensive, at least for me. I wouldn't be able to buy more than a couple of them for myself, but they work so much better and they last a lot longer too. Just to give you a more extreme example, one of the higher end brands, it's called Reconyx. And I have no relation with them, but I remember seeing one of their advertisements, and they set up one of their camera traps in Antarctica, right? And it got lots of pictures of penguins, walking by and all that stuff, right? And the same camera traps just kept taking pictures, and you can see, it's starting to go into the Antarctic winter. The snow levels, start to rise, and you can see that it started to bury the camera trap. And you can see the timestamps on the pictures, right? And then suddenly you go to the next picture, and it's the snow receding, the penguins starting to appear again, and you can see that months have passed, and the camera trap was still taking pictures. But this is for a camera trap that you need to spend like 500-600 pounds on, which you don't need to do, I don't think, in Northern Ireland.
do you
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my main interest is bats. So
Okay.
here we don't have fruit bats, but we do have microbats, which at night you would need, because of the speed at which they move, thermal imaging. And I wondered if you had any experience with thermal images being used.
Thermal images. Okay. I don't have personal experience with thermal images, but I know that a lot of biologists, they do use thermal imaging, including for animals that fly. For bats, though, most of the ecologists that I've met, they used mostly acoustic sensors for bat tracking. And I mentioned this because there was and it might still be happening, I need to double check, but there was a project called the Norfolk Bat Survey. And it was a citizen science project where they have a lot of these bat sensors, the acoustic sensors, but rather than just posting them out to people in schools, right? The project lent their sensors to a lot of libraries in the Norfolk area. And it was the libraries that were in charge of lending out the sensors to the people that visit the library. And it was great because the libraries, they are very good at lending things out. And it really decentralized the administration, and it just really made the project really successful. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but But it's just to say that there are successful citizen science bat monitoring projects too. So,
but it's what my question was for your mammal system. You don't currently use any thermal images in your system, but that's something that you could get to later on, and that obviously at the moment you haven't got anything significant from Northern Ireland, but schools would be able to purchase something in £100 range. But like you said, cost is equivalent to quality and function.
Yes.
So bear that in mind. And if they wanted to, if there was a school that really wanted to, they could get in contact with you and you'd be able to loan them equipment for a period of time. If they contacted you, you'd be able to loan them equipment for a period of time. Sorry.
I could hear you, Caroline.
I don't think he can hear me.
I think Pen's frozen.
Oh, have we lost Pen?
Sorry, I think I might have missed your last sentence.
I think
it was about whether you could loan cameras to Northern Ireland if schools got in touch with you.
Okay. Yes, sorry. Yes, I don't see any problem with that. Again, like I said, I think we would love to have your involvement in MammalWeb. I think it's something that we've been missing, and it'll be fantastic if we can make this happen. So I would love to stay in touch with you about this.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caroline.
Can I ask one more question? So over the last year with COVID, obviously lots of workplaces have been less busy and more people have been out going for their daily walk near where they live. Has the change in sort of human movement affected the animal activity you've been seeing in residential areas on your cameras?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Okay, so this is one where I have to confess I don't know yet. I haven't taken a close look at the most recent data yet from MammalWeb. However, I would hypothesize that that would see some sort of change in animal observations, and yeah. So to answer your question, I just have to say that it's something I need to look into.
I thought I had to ask a COVID question.
No, absolutely, it's a great question, and like urban ecology is a huge field. So even in cities, in some cities now, right, you can start to see some wildlife that you don't normally see as often in the past. And I think there are some interesting questions to be asked there.
Thank you.
It took me a while to I came across MammalWeb after having read an article that you wrote in an education journal, Pen.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how well-known MammalWeb is even around, say, Northeast universities. I'm just thinking of, getting the involvement of students around the cities and in their home areas, and whether you've done anything to actually try and recruit students to be able to help you.
Okay. So far what we've done is mostly through primary schools. And a huge part of that are the 42 primary schools that Sammy is working with, and that's not just in Durham. There are involvement from folks in the Newcastle area as well, and in fact, one of the professors involved in MammalWeb, who was one of my PhD supervisors, Mark Whittingham, he's based in Newcastle University. And he's been a part of this too. So that's what's going on. And we're always welcoming new students to MammalWeb, but sorry, I don't know if I started diverging too far from your original question.
I'm just thinking there might be a captive audience of students who may be able to help collect data for you or be happy to be involved in some way. And that perhaps local universities don't know about it. I certainly didn't. I hadn't picked it up through university sources. It was through a different publication.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think Durham University and Newcastle University are the are the only universities that have some, knowledge and involvement with MammalWeb at this point. So, so that might be something we have to work on too. I know that Sammy is working on educational material, and I think that's an interesting venue because I know in Wisconsin, was it Wisconsin? Or, oh, actually, it might have been Minnesota in the United States. One of the universities there is actually working on undergraduate education material for citizen science camera trapping. And I believe the people in North Carolina are thinking about are doing this too. So it's something we should be learning from.
Caroline, there's a message for you on the chat from Marcus about movement of deer in Durham City. Have you seen it?
Yes, yeah, I did. So Marcus said that in his Marcus, did you want to unmute and say about your A-level project?
Well, use camera traps, so I suppose so. But yeah, I reckon that because of COVID, people have been in the urban nature reserves more, so the deer moved out of Flassvale Nature Reserve in Durham City. That was a bit of my A-level research project I did.
Yeah, the people scared them off. Too many people like walking. We see the deer sometimes when we go out on our morning walks, don't we? So, but
well, it's good to hear that A-level projects are still continuing despite all the circumstances. It sounds like an ideal one to be looking into in these times. That's great.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
Oh, Caroline's got her hand up again, or at least I think it's her hand up again.
Yeah. Spain noted that due to when they shut down their harbors, they noticed that mammals, dolphins and whales were moving in closer to the coast as a result of a reduction in marine traffic. So, and happened in London and the southwest of the Republic of Ireland as well.
Okay. So it doesn't take long for a behaviour to change then, does it? Yeah.
That's quite encouraging, isn't it?
Yes, in a way, yeah.
It's a fantastic talk, Pen. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just while everyone's still on, Pen has put an awful lot of information in the chat. You might want to just go through the chat and note some of those links and things that he's put up there. And it's worth everyone knowing that the talk has been recorded. What will happen is that the RSB will put it up on their YouTube channel. We edit it to the end of the chat, the end of the talk. Q&As are not included. So you're welcome to look again at, or go through all the slides there, and lots of these contact details will obviously be up there as well through the slides and through the talk that Pen's book when we put it up on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, and I've included the MammalWeb email too, info@mammalweb.org. So please do email us, and thank you to all of the teachers who have expressed interest. I'm very grateful to hear about that. And so just email us, say, hey, I came to this talk, this is, what I heard, let's talk, right? So please do get in touch, and follow us on social media. It's @MammalWeb on Twitter, or just visit our website on mammalweb.org.